Okay, guys, so it's sort of hovering around the 75, 80 mark. I'm sure more people will be joining shortly, but perhaps we can get going. Introduce ourselves. I'll introduce you to the panelists as well. My name is Zoe Flood. I'm an independent journalist and filmmaker. I'm also a board member of the Frontline Freelance Register. And I previously used to chair the Foreign Correspondents Association of East Africa. I've been reporting from across predominantly sub-Saharan Africa for the last 10 years or more, working across a variety of formats, and I've been freelance for the entire time. So I'm very aware of the challenges and also the opportunities that are possible in the freelance space. And so today we're going to be looking into freelance reporting during this very unusual time for everybody in the world. Just to mention all the organizing partners: IWMF, ICFJ, FFR, Dart Centre and the ACOS Alliance, who will come together to put this panel together. And I'm sure it'll be a very interesting discussion. We've got two very experienced panelists here, both talking from the freelance side and from the commissioning side. And I know that there'll be lots of opportunity to ask questions. And I'm sure that many of you will have a lot of questions to ask. And, you know, we're also interested in hearing your experiences and if you found solutions or interesting innovations that you've come up with yourselves to respond to this massive shift in your own and all of our circumstances. So thank you so much for coming along. Just to add not too much housekeeping, but we'd love it if you guys could consider joining the ICFJ and IJNet Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. Those are pages on Facebook, which allow, there's several pages in different languages. I've actually joined them. There's a lot of interesting information being shared there, which I'm sure many of you would find useful. And also, I'll mention this again at the end, but there are some webinars coming up at the end of this week as part of the Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. And the first will be on lessons learned reporting the pandemic in New York. And the second is on covering civil unrest, especially given the current situation in the United States. So please, you know, look out for those and consider joining those as well. Great, so we're up to about 100 people now. So just for those of you who are joining, I'm not going to reintroduce myself at length, but just to say I'm Zoe Flood. I'm an independent journalist and filmmaker, and I'll be moderating the event today. I'd love to now introduce our panelists who are with us today. Melissa Noel, who's a freelance reporter who is often, you know, works to cover the Caribbean region, but obviously has been grounded as a result of the pandemic and has had to shift her reporting focus to more local national reporting issues. So she's coming with a sort of wealth of experience and thoughts about how that process has worked for her. And also Marc Perkins, who is editor of BBC Africa Eye. Hopefully many of you are familiar with BBC Africa Eye's work. Full disclosure, I also made a film for them last year. And Marc also worked as a freelance journalist and producer director for 15 years himself. So he understands a lot of the challenges and context that we're dealing with. So welcome everybody. Welcome Marc, Melissa. First of all, so much. Can I start off, and it's perhaps a question for Melissa to start with, but I think Marc would love to hear your perspective on it. How has this crisis has obviously affected the entire media industry in so many different ways. How has it affected freelance journalists in particular, from what you have seen? Perhaps we could start with you, Melissa. What is it about being freelance that has, you know, how has it played out particularly in a difficult way for us?
Right. I would say that, well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here this morning and to just be a part of this conversation, because I think that oftentimes when you're a freelancer, one of the biggest things is, you know, having to figure out what are the protections that you may or may not have for a particular outlet. And so that has played out a lot in this sense. I would say that particularly covering this pandemic, being that you're not a staff member, You don't necessarily have the same protections for an outlet you may be working for that if you were a staff member. So that has been a big challenge as to deciding whether or not I could go out and pursue a story during this time. As mentioned, I would typically do a lot of reporting in the Caribbean region. Now that I'm grounded, I'm in New York, it was deciding between, well, or having the conversations with editors of whether or not it made sense for me to go out because the news organization may or may not have been able to say, hey, we have insurance to cover our freelancers, or we don't. We can advise you to go out and do this story, but you know, you're pretty much like, it would be up to me to make that decision, and safety choices would be up to me. And then also on top of that, just not being able to pitch as well, or outlets that I've worked for saying to me that they could no longer, or at this time, they would not be able to pay freelancers due to budget cuts. So it's been a mixture of things.
And Marc, how does that resonate with your experience of what you've seen? You work extensively with freelancers.
So, I mean, on our case, we're actually in full production, and we're really 100% relying upon freelancers on the continent to basically do the work. So, I mean, I think, in our case, we do 20 investigative docs a year. But I think we are quite lucky because we built a network of really good investigative journalists across Africa beforehand, and we were working with them extensively for a couple of years. And so when this pandemic all kicked off, the small team in the UK, who would normally usually go out and help supervise or talk to journalists on the ground, weren't able to do that. But we were able to keep production going. So we're currently still in full production. I've got 5-6 docs around coronavirus ongoing and a few undercovers, and that's working so far. And I can talk more about that maybe later, about how we're working with those freelancers now, what's changed. But it is, I think this is potentially an opportunity for freelancers. I think it's like many things with the COVID. It depends where you are in your particular situation. It sort of seems to be like luck. If you happen to be someone who made a living as a freelancer going out from somewhere like the UK or from the US to somewhere, it's really difficult. I think if you are based in Nigeria or Kenya or Delhi, and you had a track record with foreign media organizations, sometimes that work is coming in more than normal, and that's what we're finding, is that we're relying upon that network, and we're in full production. So I think it's really very variable, but we're at the moment in terms of freelancers, we're using probably more than we were before.
Yes, that's a really interesting point. I think I've noticed that quite a lot with friends and colleagues, sort of in my own network, that people who are based in places where there is limited coverage opportunity, where there's limited access, and those people are getting so much work they actually can't, they're sort of swamped by it. Whereas people who are, say, perhaps based in the UK or I don't know, maybe the US is becoming so much more sort of complicated, and well, the UK's got its own complexities, but there is quite a heavy, it's quite a pre-existing media base in London, for example, and a lot of journalists who are based here already. So I think finding space as a freelancer in that kind of market right now would be quite difficult. So Melissa, you personally, how have you responded to this, and sort of what kind of tips and advice would you give, or things that you've heard might work as ways to sort of think innovatively as a freelancer? Melissa, have we still got you?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I would say, and I know that it's different in every situation. Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Are you hearing me okay? Let me know when you... Okay, perfect. I would say that a couple of things, I know that the situation is different for every single person, especially based on, where you are in the world at this time. But I have found that me pivoting when necessary was a really, really important part of me being able to still have work at this time. So understanding that the events that I expected to cover, things I had lined up in the Caribbean, were just not going to happen. But utilizing the skills I have as a multimedia journalist, like if I needed to take photos for a story, I'm out there taking photos or getting video, or just even right now with everything that's happening in the US due to racial injustice and protests, those kinds of things. I worked as a line producer for a long time. You need a lot of outlets need producers right now, or need people to be able to help facilitate video. So I've had to shift in that sense and say that or look for those specific ways that I can utilize my experience to get commissioned. So right now, a lot of editors are looking for pieces that have to do with the unrest taking place in the US. And because that's something that I've reported on for a long time, I said, okay, well, I may not be doing news on the Caribbean right now, or the reopenings of countries, amidst the pandemic, but now I need to focus on this because this is where the news is, or this is what editors are looking for. So I think in that, wherever you are, really looking at what the pulse is, right? Or what are commissioning editors looking for at that time? How are things changing? What is the call for? And seeing where you can fit into that, or even bring that unique sense of a specificity of what you cover. So that has helped me. And then also taking a look at, I think this is a point in time where me personally, I've never seen this amount of opportunity in the sense of emergency funding for freelancers, or the opportunity to take classes. Like I'm starting a class today from the Poynter Institute, something that would have typically costed, cost about $500 US, but I could take it for $50 at this time and get those training, get those skills that I would not have gotten otherwise, or couldn't afford due to pricing. So I'm taking advantage of those opportunities right now to build skills, as well as see where I can fit in terms of pitching, because it is changing constantly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how would you say, I'll come back to you in a second, Marc, but Melissa, how would you say that the story focus has shifted for you over the past few months? Obviously, we sort of had relatively normal operations in January in terms of the worldwide reporting approach to everything, and then suddenly a massive shift towards COVID and the pandemic. And then now you're talking about covering civil unrest. I mean, how do you feel that preference has shifted and changed? And do you think it will continue to do so as fast as we've seen, because it has moved very quickly?
Yeah, I think I've had to learn that my normal story beats are not necessarily going to be normal for a while, but the intersections of how I can tell those stories will always be there. So for instance, I'm covering the protest in New York City from a production standpoint, but also as a person that covers the Caribbean region, I am also starting to do stories on how other parts of the world are responding, the global response to this, racial injustice in the US. How is the Caribbean responding? How are people trying to confront the, own issues of racism or colonialism or different things like that? And I'm able to bring that knowledge and those intersections into my stories in a way that maybe I hadn't thought about before. But I'm getting questions from editors in that sense, and I'm able to bring that in. I think I'll continue to see it change. We will continue to see the shift. But I think also at the same time, what's been a bit of a difficult balance, and I'm still working on that for myself, is, over the weekend, I was covering, Caribbean countries reopening their borders, this week, several islands, but then, that's one day, but then the next day I have to flip right toward, the civil unrest in the US and the protests. So it's just ensuring that I am really read in on everything, continuing to watch for the updates and kind of staying on the pulse of both beats at the same time, because I think that's something we're going to see continue for quite a while. Mm-hmm.
So very sort of divergent sets of stories that are both very important, but happening simultaneously.
Right. And just the reminder of for every freelancer that whatever beat you may have, still staying on top of what's happening near you, because those present the opportunities. If I wasn't paying attention to like the local news in that sense, then I wouldn't have been able to kind of jump on board with some of the local outlets here in New York City that needed protest coverage, or that needed, a producer or something like that. So being able to jump in at the right time for those things, and having that just simple knowledge base of whatever that may be in your local community, I think has been really important for helping me to get jobs at this time.
Great. And Marc, sort of from taking that from an editor's perspective, I mean, you mentioned earlier in the conversation that you have a number of documentaries focusing on COVID that are in production. Obviously, you're looking at issues from many different perspectives. are you still interested in other issues as an editor? I mean, obviously the pandemic is revealing a lot of cracks in many systems and exposing and creating opportunities for corruption and other things that Africa Eye looks into. How are you guys balancing those different stories?
So we've got quite a few currently, around COVID, but I'm now sort of focusing on the medium term. And no, I think there's going to be corona fatigue, and people are going to want to look at other things. So we're currently looking at, and we're currently in development on a number of other projects. I mean, everything has a flavour of COVID to it. That's inevitable at this current point. But no, I'm definitely looking for other projects now that are not directly linked, just to reporting on COVID. And I think we've got that pretty much. We've covered quite a lot of that so far. I mean, I would say, that there seems to be at the moment a sort of divergent thing going on with freelancers, because, on one hand, you've got, for media organizations, it's a time of enormous disruption, and you've got massive drops in ad revenue, plus et cetera, and so you've got huge shifts where you've got where it's very bad for freelancers because there's a massive loss of revenue for these media organizations. And frankly, the first thing, and I've been through this many times myself, first thing they do is to cut freelancers loose, and you have to go off and you may be working there for quite a while, and automatically that's it, you're out of there. And that's the first thing that many media organizations will do is to cut down the number of freelancers use. At the same time, you've got a situation where, because you can't travel, because staff can't travel and staff reporters can't travel, and we're in the news business, there is a requirement, and they have to turn to freelancers to kind of cover that gap. So I think it is a sort of divergent. There's good and bad things coming forward. But I don't know. Nobody knows what will happen in the medium or long term. But I would have thought, certainly when I was freelancing, there were lots of ups and downs from 2008 to others, and you just have to weather them and get through them. And to be honest with you, it does pick up now. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think that in general, lots and lots of many huge numbers of media organizations rely upon freelancers a lot. I don't think that's going to change overnight. So some media organizations may fall, or some will grow, but I do think in general freelancing is going to be okay. It's just whether all freelancers can get through this short period, basically.
And talking about that, sort of how to get through this period, because obviously there's been a lot of pain, and I've seen it quite a lot in a lot of the freelance Facebook groups and so on, people talking about how am I going to pay my bills next month? The sort of income stream that everyone had expected for themselves has suddenly been pulled out from underneath them, and especially in environments where there's no government support offered for the self-employed. I've seen, across Africa especially, a lot of freelancers are just not in that position. I actually, found out that I could claim some self-employed support from the UK government as a UK taxpayer as a freelancer, but there's so many people who don't have that opportunity. And so what kind of options do people have right now in terms of there's the emergency funding, but in terms of diversifying their income streams, even if it's a temporary solution, what kind of things are you guys, in your experience, of the things that could work right now, aside from diversifying the kind of reporting you're doing, but other kinds of activities? Maybe Melissa or Marc, carry on.
Well, I mean, just quickly from my perspective, I don't think that's fundamentally any different from the normal things to do as a freelancer. It's just double, triple times as bad as it was before. So there's normal things that, so it's trying to diversify the employers you're using. So you're not just using one employer, because if that goes down, for other things like having some additional income streams. So for a long time, I had my own broadcast kit and rented that out. That always helped as a income generator. And then and the normal thing, like you're talking, not just pivoting like Melissa's talking about, but also having another skill set. So I did training for a long time. So you've got something which can tick over when there's not immediately commissions coming in for you, basically. I'm not sure there's anything. I mean, Melissa, please jump in. I'm not sure there's anything brand new.
So I would say everything you said is correct. I think it's really important as freelancers, you have to really think about yourself as a business, and thinking about yourself as a business is including, how to make money in other ways. For me, I teach. As journalists, you have you have so many different skill sets. So I do teach journalism, I teach communications courses, and being that right now, so many people across the globe are doing distance learning. I've picked up doing classes for students, 5th grade students through high school and university who are doing finishing their semesters online. I have been teaching courses about 3 days a week. So that has been, a different source of income. And then also something that I've done as a one-off workshop, or, you know, have done a couple of them in the past, teaching people how to pitch the press or how to create their press kits. People who want to kind of like, they're taking this time to up their game, who work in other industries. You know, as a reporter, I have that skill set, and now I'm offering it to other people and charging for it, so that I'm generating income in that sense. So I've had to get more creative and know that, hey, there are services that and skills that we have as journalists, as reporters, that other people want to learn how to do. They're trying to up their skills in the same way. So utilizing this as a time to offer that and to charge for that, and knowing that as a business, that's something you should do. So that has been really helpful for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I from my experience as well, just to add to that, I fully agree that this is something that freelancers should be doing regardless of the situation, because it's something that you can do to protect yourself against shocks, let's call it, economic shocks or professional shocks. You know, who knows what can happen, especially as a freelancer. Your situation is much more fragile. But also just, yeah, I think it's maybe forced quite a few people to consider some of those options a bit more strongly. And hopefully people will be able to take that forward when this particular period is over or has subsided in its intensity. And maybe it will create more of a cushion for them going forward. And I think it's worth, if you're not very busy with work at the moment, to sort of consider those options and how to develop those income strands, those backup options, those opportunities to create a cushion for yourself, and also just make a more, you know, reliable and regular income stream. And I think training and teaching are fantastic elements of that. I mean, I've noticed quite a few friends doing quite a lot of comms work for humanitarian agencies, which is something that in the Nairobi sort of freelance journalist pool is a very common thing to do, producing photography or writing, you know, feature articles that are not reported in the same way as you might do for the media, but you're commissioned to write them, say, for UN agencies. And yes, and I think there's quite a lot of, like, I've seen quite a lot of people needing copywriting skills at the moment, online entities. You know, these are things that journalists can diversify into quite quickly, so they have those communication skills. And I also feel like that's in terms of earning money, but I think also what you were saying before about doing your own distance learning, Melissa, like this is an opportunity right now to kind of skill up if you're not that busy. And certainly, I mean, I've found it much more possible to sustain an existence as a freelancer by being, I mean, I'm a broadcast journalist, but also producer, director. I shoot, I do radio, and I write. So having all those different skills has made it much more possible for me to sort of run myself as a business, like Melissa just said. And in terms of, you know, investing in your own professional development at this point in time, you know, what kind of things, you mentioned the Pointer Institute, Melissa. I mean, do either of you guys have any good sort of suggestions of things that you have seen over the last few months that are particularly good quality courses that people might be interested in exploring at this moment? Melissa, perhaps you could.
I would say that there are a number of sites that I have used and continue to use. One thing, I do check IJNet pretty regularly, not only because there are opportunities for fellowships and scholarships or competitions, but I see a lot of training opportunities. And for me, that's a really big thing, because a lot of the times these training opportunities are ones that are offered to staff or ones that are just really expensive and just kind of out of reach for many freelancers. So being that, you know, being now that, especially with safety being on everyone's mind, and that there are, you know, free safety trainings or free hostile environment trainings being offered online, I just say to myself, I have to jump on those, because I may not get the opportunity, you know, for a really long time to make that possible for myself. So I need to take this time to invest in doing that. I saw a question in the comments. Someone said, you know, they want to break into international reporting, but is this a good time to do it? Is that something you should do right now, or how can you do it in the age of COVID? And I would say right now, one of my suggestions would be applying for fellowships or applying to grant, you know, funding through different organizations, because not only will you have to really zero in on what it is you're trying to report on and really get it down to like what what you really want to do. But at the same time, one of the biggest things is creating a safety plan. And that not only makes you more equipped to go and work on that story, but it puts you in a better position to get a yes from that organization. I think that's a great way to do it because you have the support of that institution behind you, you have the safety training behind you, and you'll be in a better position to do that. So those are just a few of the things that have been helpful for me right now.
And Marc, I mean, as an editor, as a commissioner, what kind of skills are valuable to you? You know, there's a whole smorgasbord of production skills and you know, communication skills and writing skills that, you know, all of us could develop further. But if people were trying to prioritize, because obviously we can't sort of do all of it at the moment, what would you say are skills that you find useful in individuals and individual freelancers that you work with?
I mean, I think now is two things really. One is that now's a time to reach out to more commissioning editors and more, you know, if you've got some downtime now, you know, involuntarily, but, you know, if you've got some downtime, now's a good time to research and look at other commissioners across the, you know, across the globe, and look at other places you wouldn't normally look. So if you normally a print journalist, start looking at broadcast. If you're online, if you're a broadcast, start looking at online and other things. Start doing some research and start looking to see who else you can approach, and then approach them. I mean, you know, all these editors and commissioners are sitting waiting for story ideas for the most part. So I think reaching out is now a really good, a good thing to do. And the second thing from my perspective, which is more broadcast, like you're talking, Zoe, you know, I don't think going forward as a freelancer, you can, I mean, when I started as a shoot producer, like you did, Zoe, and, you know, I think now is not a time, if you're going to be in broadcast, you need to learn to shoot. I don't think you need to learn to shoot and edit. It's the basics grammar of writing, and you know, if you're going to go into broadcast, and frankly, if you're not going to go into broadcast, everybody's filming video now, so why wouldn't you? If it's whether you're shooting on an iPhone or shooting on a, you know, SF5 or whatever level you want to go at, you need to learn the basics of the grammar of TV, which is shooting and editing. And so I think now is a really good time. You don't have to, you know, don't expect in 2 weeks to, you know, to be able to do it all, but it doesn't really matter if you can get yourself more firmed into that basic understanding of shooting and editing. It's going to help you. I think now is a really good time to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think, you know, the reason why I've been able to pivot rather quickly to a lot of different needs is because of multimedia skills. I can shoot, edit, I can do long form reporting, I can pivot for magazines. It's like whatever is needed, I'm able to make it happen. And right now, when it comes to the protests happening across the United States, I have not, you know, yet been out to cover protests. That's something that I do expect to happen within the next couple of days, but I have been, you know, a producer, and I've been able to go in there and produce the stories or produce the news segments. And that's important too, because it's an all hands on deck approach. Not everyone's going to be the person out there on the front lines every time, but to have the skills to play the different roles that are needed at that time, it has been really crucial. And especially when they're sending out teams of 4 and 5 people, they need people back in the newsroom, where they need people to be working remotely to get stuff on the air.
Absolutely. And I mean, I just to sort of add to that, I totally agree that I think that it's shooting and editing are such important skills. And I think it's becoming, I mean, I sort of learned I started to do sort of film, TV work on my own in a solo sort of backpack fashion. And so had to learn everything in one go. And it was a pretty mad scramble, but it meant that I was much more ready to take on bigger projects and also be available to editors and commissioners who were looking at for somebody who could do all of those things in one go. But then I can also have the skill set, like you're saying, Melissa, to go and join and be a producer as needed, depending on what the team requirements are. And I do think, just to add to that in terms of practical terms, I've often had people ask me like, oh, well, I want to be a camera person, I want to produce, I want to direct telly or make videos, and I better get a camera and then I'll start doing that. But, you know, you don't have to buy a camera. You've got a camera on your phone and you can learn, you know, what Marc's talking about, the sort of the grammar of TV, the way that stories are constructed visually. If you're coming from, say, a print background, just using that phone, you can deconstruct, you know, how news packages work, look at the way the shots are put together, the angles, whether it's news or news features for broadcast this is, and you can sort of think about that from your phone. I mean, when I learned to shoot, I was like, you know, telling a story with an apple on a cup on a table, you know, working out how to tell that story visually. And you can do that in lockdown with your iPhone and a mug and an apple, see where you get to. And it's a sort of, it's good discipline, I think, to work on that. And then sort of coming back to the sort of approaching commissioners, Marc? You just said that, and I've seen a question in the comments here about sort of how to pitch in a crisis. So there's two different things. One is building a relationship with commissioners in this downtime period. So how would you suggest people approach that, Marc, without sort of being annoying and kind of sending non sort of useful emails to you? And then in a secondary sense, if people are pitching a specific story, how would you suggest they frame those pitches right now to be useful to you and to make it easier to get through, because you're going to be swamped from every direction? How should people approach those two angles?
There are no annoying approaches. I mean, I work as an editor, and the way I get stories comes from you lot out there. I don't make them up in myself. I'm sitting in London, so no, there are no annoying approaches ever. I think the only thing that all commissioning editors should have an open door to everybody coming in the door, and everybody has different skill sets or different information or knowledge, and so it's not so much that, but just be aware of a couple of things. First thing is that all we do when these pitches come in is look at all the various different, is it the right time? Is the access good? We ask a bunch of questions. Is the person, does this check out? All the normal questions you'd ask around a story, and then you put a team together. So, okay, this is a print reporter, they don't know TV, but that's okay, I can put a shoot producer with them, etc. So you're building teams and building stories all the time. So there's never an annoying things. The only thing I would say is that if you don't bother to research the program you're heading for, you will get short shift. So if you're sending in an Africa for an Africa Eye, and it's just totally inappropriate for us, you're going to get a very short response. It's just going to be a no. And so there's a huge number of stuff coming in. I saw it said, did you need to do shorter pitches because this is no? I think it's most of the time. I mean, in our case, we have a system where if it comes to me, I'll say thanks very much, and I'll pass it over to a series of sort of producers and exec producers who we have an incoming committee that deals with all the coming through, and then we triage our way through them, looking for all the normal things you expect. It doesn't have to be a short pitch, but and as you said earlier, I have 15 years as a freelancer, and I sent I don't know how many pitches, and sometimes often never received a response. And now I'm on the other side of it. I realize sometimes why that is, and that's because you've had, there's just a flood of stuff coming in. So if you research really well and you say, yes, the program I'm pitching in, or the idea I'm pitching in, is similar or fits in with that program's things, you're in with a much better start. I get about half of them that come in are just completely inappropriate. And that's life, that happens. That's how you learn, I guess, in the pitching process. But it's, if you research that program really well, and it's just going on the internet, checking it out, then you'll have a far better idea of getting through the door to the next stage. So I don't think COVID's changed in terms of commissioning. I don't think it's changed. Shorter pitches, as someone's suggesting. I think you should always know that, certainly for docs and stuff like that, it's going to be a development process. You're going to pitch in as an idea. Don't send 15 pages with photographs, because if I've got if you sent me an amazing Sudan pitch and I've just commissioned a Sudan film and that's it, I might be kicking myself and going, oh, that one's much better, but I've already got one in production and I'm not going to run it, and it's not your fault and there's nothing wrong with it. So don't spend 3 days putting together 15 pages. Send us a 1 page, tell us why it's important, tell us what's the story, what's your access, what have you got that no one else has? Because we often get a lot of pitches as well, just say, I want to talk about COVID in Nigeria. That's not a story, that's just a idea. So tell us your access that you've got that no one else has, and then tell us and give us some idea of why it's important to the audience. And so you've researched who our audience is. In our case, it's purely for the sub-Saharan Africa, and then tell us those few things in 3 or 4 paragraphs, and that's it, you're done. And you should get a response. And I don't think there's anything else. There's no other. I don't think COVID's changed fundamentally the way we're looking at pitches or how that works.
Mm-hmm. There's no prioritization to COVID pitches or.
So I think where it's difficult, where it is difficult, where we're finding things is, so people are pitching stuff. So anything that came pre-COVID, so ideas that were there pre-COVID, they've all 90% of them have somehow changed slightly. And so those ideas there is a sort of mark in the line, there's a line in the sand where, if there's something that you said us 2 months ago, it probably will have changed in some fashion. Let's be honest, because it's a global pandemic. So that's complicated. Going forward, I think we've had a few projects where it's a good idea, but because industries have largely shut down, we're like, okay, well, let's see if it picks up again and see if it then. So some people have been put on hold in the sort of development process because there's a great story, but is it going to go back to be the same way as before? Often it will be. It's just like, we'll give it a month or 2 months, and that same wrongdoing will carry on, etc., etc. So there's a bit of a waiting period, but I don't think there's any. We're not. If there's stories which aren't COVID related and they're just tainted with COVID, that's fine. That's fine by us. And I suspect most, I think across the BBC, we are looking for non-COVID stories. I mean, it's been nothing but front page COVID, and I think now is the time when people should be pitching stuff which isn't directly related to COVID. There's interest within the media organizations now, definitely, for non-COVID related stories.
And I would add to that, so I work for about 5 different news organizations at any given time, both television and digital. And so that's the message I've been getting from my editors. Now is the time that we want to start looking at other stories. So for instance, so they may be COVID adjacent, but more so looking at maybe it's the economic impact on travel, right? People, it's summertime, or it's big travel season. So it's like, how has that changed? It's an opportunity to do travel pieces again. It's an opportunity to look at the intersections with health and travel, something that I necessarily hadn't done a lot of before, but seeing that I can, get those kinds of stories done. Summer is a big time for a lot of festivals and events that are going to be canceled. So what about those people? So I have found myself saying, okay, this may not be on COVID directly, but it's COVID adjacent, because this is how this pandemic has impacted this industry. And now what's coming out of it? Is it innovation? Is it new events? Is it, what's happening with virtual reality and augmented reality? There's just been a lot of different ways to now take the story I thought I was going to do, can't do anymore, and now do something different and update it and still have something that is a good story and can kind of speak to the skills that I have, and then help me to push forth for new ones.
Yeah, I mean, those are fantastic insights, and I just have to sort of add, it's a bit of a sort of sidebar story, but I personally haven't been freelancing that much the last few weeks, because I've been helping to launch a romantic comedy film from Zimbabwe onto Netflix. And the reason I mention it is that the media pickup has been quite astonishing. And every journalist that I've sort of pitched it to is like, do you want to write about this film that's coming out, this kind of unlikely story? And they're just saying, oh, anything that's not COVID, please. And people are really like, it's quite interesting. I think we've got quite a lot more pickup, because there is that fatigue and that appetite for something that's, and also in this instance, like a feel-good story. People are tired of everything being absolutely awful the whole time, and perhaps that's not sort of the usual beats of many people who are watching this call. I'm sure there's a lot of people on here who work on politics, economic turmoil, conflict, but also, there's opportunities to diversify the type of story one's covering. If that's a way of, maybe doing some cultural reporting, if that's going to help get you through this period, again, pivoting away from your normal beat. But if you are covering, COVID stuff, which a lot of people, COVID and many different forms of the coverage, be it, covering hospitals, care homes, be it covering the way that societies are responding in different ways to this, what do you think are the particular safety considerations for freelancers? I mean, we mentioned it a bit at the beginning, but what do you think as a freelancer you should be asking for, Melissa? And what, Marc, afterwards, do you think organizations should be making sure that they're providing?
I think one of my biggest concerns have been, having personal protective equipment, and also adjusting how you report, right? So instead of having a stick mic to someone's, face, or being in that close proximity, I've had to get an extension so that the mic is, create some distance between myself and the subject. I had to make sure I have a mask, that I'm sanitizing my equipment more regularly. All those things have come into regular process, but I do understand that having access to those things is not the same for everyone, based on where they work and where they live. So for me, my safety has to come first. I have turned down assignments where I felt like my health may be at risk because of the nature of it, or where I might be at that point in time. And so for me, I thought, okay, I would love to take this assignment, but I need to think long term. I need to think about my health and safety. So I turned it down. And I think that's a personal decision that, each person, needs to assess for themselves, but always assessing can I protect myself in this situation? And if you feel like you can't, then it may be a point where rethinking that. I think also being that I am a freelancer, organizations are not required to, provide a sense of coverage to me as they would their staff members. So I think having a really open and honest discussion with your managing editor or whomever the editor is that you're working with is important to understand what the policy is, what is the policy for freelancers. Are they able to provide you with any kind of gear or equipment? Or are they not? And is that something that will factor into that decision? So that's been my rule of thumb through this pandemic. And I think moving forward is something I have to keep in mind, particularly when I start to, get back to the Caribbean, just adjusting how I even conduct my regular interviews. That will change. And I think will make me and whomever I'm interviewing or working with safer in the long run.
Great, thanks, Melissa. And Marc, what do you think is sort of the essential responsibilities of media commissioning editors in this time particularly?
I don't think it's changed at all. I think COVID is just another safety factor that you've got to deal with. We have in the BBC, there's a set protocol that whether it's the kind of PPE you're using and the circumstances in which you're doing it and what's signed off, and there's a high risk team and there are various other teams that the BBC, that freelancers have to work through. So they're not really treated any different. I don't think we wouldn't deploy freelancers or staff if we weren't reasonably happy with their safety and whatever. So I don't think that's changed at all. I think within the BBC, I think it gets more complicated when you're starting to work for other media organizations who perhaps are not quite as strict as about safety. And I think that becomes the same thing that's always existed for freelancers, which is, as Melissa was saying, it's a personal choice. And I've taken risks which I probably shouldn't have done in the past as a freelancer to get the job done or to get a story done. Maybe that was a mistake, maybe it wasn't, depends. But I think it's quite personal, your decisions around that. And I think, but as I would just reiterate what Melissa's saying, was this is a personal thing in terms of your decisions as a freelancer. And you've got, like we were talking about, you're a business, so run it as a business, where you're also, an individual who has to make decisions about risk and what's worth it and what's not worth it to you. But I mean, I think, it goes without saying that all employers in general should be utterly, if they're going to employ you, then they have responsibilities towards your safety. I think the most complicated thing for people managing freelancers is not, certainly on our side, is not around the operations as in doing it. It's around long-term post-TX ramifications. Certainly in terms of things like investigations or when you're holding power to account in some form. I think that gets extremely complicated. We do a lot of time on this because, fine, you get the story done, it goes out, everyone says amazing job. And then, but you as a freelancer are still living in that country and you have to deal with potential ramifications, be it by government or by other actors. And that's really complicated because it's very difficult to measure. So, and that's when I said, I think again, as a freelancer, it's your responsibility to make, you'll work with the whoever it is, the BBC or NBC or CNN, whoever, to work on that, but never forget that post-TX ramification, because at the end of the day, you're going to live there. And if there's people who are very unhappy with what you've reported, you're going to live with that. And that there's a limit to what those organizations can do 1 year, 2 years down the line. So post-TX ramifications, I think, is a huge issue that's very complicated for freelancers. Whereas I think actually the straight thing, like should your employer provide you PPE if they're going to send you out to an interview? Yes, it's a no-brainer.
And on that sort of tricky line about post-TX, do you think there's a sort of ethical consideration or a discussion to be had around freelancers going out to report on COVID-related stories, the risk that they're potentially exposing to themselves, that they might get sick and then not be able to work, and potential loss of income or worse?
Yeah.
Well, how are those discussions being had in newsrooms? Are they being had in either of
your They're absolutely being had, and they're forming part of that. I mean, the only thing I think we can do is to keep those is to stop people getting infected as much as possible. So that's providing the right gear, providing the right training and understanding of how to use that gear and what to do, and also limiting the kind of exposure you're going to get. But it's really difficult. If you're running around church services in Lagos now, there's chunks of people, they're not wearing, it's very difficult. It's very dependent on where you are. If you're in a rural village in Hampshire, in London, versus downtown crowded Lagos, it's a very different place. Some are worse than others. So you need proper risk assessments and you need proper equipment. And I think if this continues, it's going to get really difficult. As I think all of us have sort of thought, okay, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, provided something's coming, it's sort of manageable. But if this stays with us for 2, 3, 4 years, or however long it takes, it could get really complex in terms of freelancers, because the more time you're out there, the more time the more at risk, and the more likely it is that you'll catch this. So that gets really complicated. But the only way to deal with it at the moment is provide the best level of exposure and minimize the risks, so that you're not pushing too far, too fast on things. And that's all you can, I think at the moment, that's all you can do.
Mm-hmm. And that's also something that freelancers have some power themselves to say, right, I'm comfortable with this and I'm not comfortable with that. And I think that, whilst, especially if you're perhaps earlier on in your career, you might want to push quite fast and far quickly. I think it's really important, and not only in a sort of COVID sense, but any kind of risk taking, that, you need to work up very, very carefully and thoughtfully. What do you think about that, Melissa, in terms of how editors are talking about this?
So I just wanted to add to that quickly, that especially if you're starting out as a freelancer and you're looking to report in another country, even where your home country, maybe it's a different part of the country. Now I really feel like it's the time to familiarize yourself with like the safety plans that, putting together your own safety plans, ensuring that you have like, travel or, freelance insurance coverage for equipment, for health, those kinds of things. Now is the time to really learn how those things work. And that's why I'm so happy that I've kind of had like a little pause to really update those things, because those are the things that will protect you if you get yourself into a situation. So if, being in the Caribbean a lot, one of the things that I have to deal with a lot, is natural disasters. So having my insurance up to date and having that coverage is really crucial for me, because if something happens while I'm reporting, I need to be able to either get out or, switch flight plans. So for instance, in March, I was in Montserrat covering a story, and I learned that borders were starting to close due to COVID-19. So I knew right away that I needed to put my, safety plan into place, leave Montserrat. And typically the way into Montserrat, I had to fly into Antigua and take a ferry over there. I had to switch my plans immediately, get on a ferry out of Montserrat, get back to Antigua, and get the first flight I could back to the US before borders started to close. So not only having the plan, but knowing like how to execute it in case something changes, like right as you're on assignment, is really crucial. So I would encourage people, especially freelancers that are now starting out, to take the time to really, focus on those things, and knowing what that entails, what that safety plan entails, knowing what mitigation strategies entail, and knowing like what risk you're willing to take or not take. So that you'll be ready. This is a conversation that is being had in newsrooms by editors over and over again, but I think it's something that has to continue and will continue, because this is going to be with us for quite a while. So as the situation evolves, I think this will evolve to these conversations.
And just to follow on from that, I can see a couple of questions in the chat about medical insurance, about safety plans, and sort of how to find out more information about more resources in order to learn about those things. So just to add that the ACOS Alliance, together with partners ICFJ, including ICFJ, Dart Center, IWMF and FFR, which are some of the partners that have brought together this webinar today, they're launching next week a resource for news organizations on sort of discussing about how to adopt COVID safety procedures. And it's particularly aimed at commissioning editors working with freelancers. And that will be available on acosalliance.org from Thursday the 9th. And it does pay attention to issues like PPE expenses, insurance and accreditation. And certainly all of the organizations that I've just listed there, if you go to their websites and you have a look, there's quite a lot about safety. You can, I'm not exactly sure where they are now, but I've looked there in the past. There are sample safety plans, sample risk assessments on some of these websites. And you can definitely, it's good to go and familiarize yourself with what those are like and what kind of questions they ask you about your reporting.
So I wanted to add, I actually took a IWMF safety webinar maybe like a month and a half ago, and there were, some of a safety plan that was a part of that session was from the ACOS Alliance, and I was able to sit down and say, okay, let me update, because I had to update my mitigation strategies and safety plans to include pandemics, right? That was something that I had never thought about before, but now that has to be a part of my plan going forward. Now PPE has to be a part of my my budget that I put together when I'm pitching for fellowships. All those things matter. So I was really happy, you know, and it was a webinar that was free, right? So again, taking advantage of some of these things that I either wasn't privy to before or maybe would have had to pay for in person, they're being offered to us right now. So I'm doing my best, you know, not to have too much, you know, fatigue and going to everything, but really picking out what I need to, you know, for myself and what would be valuable to me and taking advantage of that right now.
Sorry. On the issue of insurance, you know, that's come up quite a few times in the questions. I'm sorry if I'm not addressing your questions by name, but I'm just trying to gather them as we go through and use them to direct the discussion. I'm just saying that to the participants, but quite a few questions about insurance. This is like a really thorny issue for many freelancers and for the media outlets that commission them. What do you guys think should be the best practice around this? Maybe Marc, you could.
It's complicated because the BBC's got its own way of doing things. You know, its own. It's sort of in effect it sort of self-insures and manage it. So if you commission through us, then you know, if you do commission for us, then you're covered, and we've got all sorts of things from high-risk teams and various other bits and pieces in place to manage that and look after you. And so that is a very good model, but not all places can do that. And I think there's a question there saying, you know, what about if the insurance is that high and they expect you to have your insurance when you're reporting from a hostile environment or not, or something like that, and they expect you to have your insurance as part of that, and it's too high, and of course, you know, you end up saying, well, that's, you know, $20 a day after I paid my insurance for me. I mean, that's not, you know, I think at that point you have to be really honest with commissioners and just tell them, look, I'm sorry, this is my day rate and this is what the insurance is costing. So I don't mind who pays it. You can pay it, I can pay it. Doesn't how it works. But this is my day rate and this is what it costs. Really hard if you're starting out because you want those, you know, you want those bylines, you want that credit, and I think that's really, really complicated. So I don't have I mean, because most of my time has been through the BBC. I don't normally have those insurance questions, so I'm probably not. But I would generally say though that if you need that insurance, it could be covered, and there are lots and lots of new kinds of insurance coming through for freelancers, which is really useful, which weren't around when I was doing it, and I actually went out often uninsured. Which is not a good thing to do. So I think there are new and actually relatively cheap. Some people think, oh, it's going to be thousands of pounds to go to, you know, Iraq or Jordan or something like that. It's not actually. There's some actually really good prices out there specifically for journalists. So I think look around and study the resources that you're talking about. You can get insured for reasonable prices. It's not insane, but do look, because if you get a first price and it's like £2,000 a day, then you're looking at the wrong place.
Yes, absolutely. And just sort of, yeah, I mean, I'm sure Melissa, you sort of agree on that front, and I think it's very important as a freelancer, but again, very difficult if you're starting out to make sure that you're trying to budget that into your own costings. I mean, there are certain entities, and again, I've just seen on the chat that people are asking for the company names. It would be best if we could just direct you to the sort of the organizing entities that are organizing this webinar, because they've collated a lot of those resources.
Right.
So rather than just dropping a few names in here, if you guys can have a look there, there are some which will do it by the day, and I've taken that out before. If I'm going to a particular high risk environment and I'll say, okay, I'm going for 3 or 4 days, I need to buy that insurance for that period from when I'm arriving and then leaving. And that's actually, it's not unaffordable, and certainly it's not unaffordable even to suggest to a media outlet to say, guys, maybe you can cover.
I think it should absolutely be. You should be absolutely honest and clear with your commissioner that you know that you know this is, you know, if they're expecting you, if it's a small outlet, they're expecting you to cover your own insurance for a short travel somewhere like you're talking, Zoe. If you're going to jump into Uganda for 4 or 5 days or something for a small job, then I think you can absolutely be upfront and say, this is my cost. This is what it costs. This is what it's going to cost. You know, this is the best price I can get for insurance, and that's added in as a bottom line to it. They should not be expecting you to travel without it.
Absolutely. Got so many questions here. In terms of, there's a few practical ones I'm just going to throw in at the end here, if that's okay. Sure. One question here about, are there any skills beyond broadcasting that you think are or will be in high demand that we can work on? So we did talk a bit about broadcasting, but are there other skill sets? This person, is Christina, has asked, would taking a science journalism course be useful at this point? Or perhaps, you know, pursuing more knowledge around healthcare reporting. So I do feel that there's some dearth of experience in that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's not just maybe the hard skills, let's say shooting or editing, but the just being able to, I guess, build out that beat or that expertise in different things, because we're gonna see a lot of different stories continue to come out of this. So I've been seeing a lot of science and tech, for instance. So either it's familiarizing yourself with those beats or that, learning more about those things, I think would be really great, because then you will develop an expertise in that regard. I've had to take a lot of time to learn about the different strains of COVID-19 and, build that into my reporting, talking to more experts, that kind of thing. I think also what I've seen is a lot more with podcasting. So a lot of people have started their own podcast and, learning, getting the microphones or the recorders, spending money on those things to invest in themselves. I've seen that happen a lot, and that's been really helpful for some people. And then I also think just being able to, a lot more places really need good social media. So having those social media skills, and maybe it's managing it for an outlet or for a brand or organization, really being able to be on message and utilizing your skills as a journalist to be that voice for an organization or for a platform. I've seen those things happening a lot lately, and some opportunities I had never thought of.
Great, thank you. I've just checked in with our organisers. We're coming towards the end of the hour, but they've said that since there's so many questions coming through, if we don't mind going on for a little bit longer, 10 minutes maybe, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure,
I've got a few points just on that skilling up stuff. One is a really simple thing, which is something that I was and probably still am really bad at, which is as a freelancer, you've got to get yourself out there. You've got to get your name out there. You've got to really, pump your, who you are and who you're meeting and why you're meeting, and make sure your presence and your CV and everything else is, whether or your LinkedIn or whatever, is properly up to date. I mean, that's really, really important. Because I think it's something that, that if you just sort of try and, it's not, freelancing is a fairly brutal game, and you can't be quiet and shy and just go, oh, well, I'm sure I'll be okay, I'll send a CV. And I do think really pushing yourself out there is extremely important. Being persistent but polite with everybody you deal with is extremely important. And if you don't do that, and if you sit back and wait for commissions, it's not going to happen. I mean, that's one point. I mean, the other point, I mean, really is around, I think, we should be honest with everybody out there in freelancing, which is that, you tend to be, it's fine to try and get multiple skills, which is a good idea. But when CVs or stuff comes into me, you are looking for people who've got experience. You're not going to be immediately just go, oh, well, that person's done that course, no problem. And I think, there is, to a degree, while you can be multi-skilled, I think if you there's no point pitching to the same broadcaster, I'll do your print piece, but I'm a broadcast specialist. I think you've got to sort of, say, this is mainly what I do, this is what I'm good at, and here's my CV to prove it, because you're not going to get through the door with just, I've taken a course in this. You'll need if you want to do hostile environment recording, as always, you'll probably have to show that you've dealt with one or two of them before. And when CVs come to me, I'm looking for, okay, does this person have a track record in political reporting or forensic, investigative reporting or et cetera, et cetera. And that's what you're looking for. Now, it's really hard. It's a bit brutal to say, but I'm not, you don't tend to pick up brand new beginners just because they've done a course. So I think, courses are really useful to get you the skills there, but what you really need, of course, is experience in the field, having done it. And I think it's important to try and narrow a bit down where your core specialty, your core interest is. So you will need to be multi-skilled in terms of techniques, whether it's broadcast, print, whatever. But I do think you can specialize, and that's important, because that's where you're going to get regular commissions. Is if you've got a track record of doing, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's print journalism on travel journalism, print pieces, that's fine. It's just that, right, here's 10 articles I've written for major publications, that will get you more commissions. Whereas, a wide, broad spread of different, I've done a bit here, a bit there. It's, I hate to say it, but those CVs, they come in, you go, not really, and you're moving on.
And just to add to what Marc says, on my side, as a reporter who, to get myself out there, to be able to start reporting in the Caribbean region, what I did first was, I'm in New York City, largest population of Caribbean people in the United States. So I reported on the community right here to show that I could take whatever issue that was happening there and show that I could that there was an intersection in the US, and this is how it impacted the community here, and this is what was happening. And I built up that, those clips that way. And then I started doing stuff for NBC News and was able to take it to a national level. And then once I started getting commissioned for those assignments in the region, I already had a track record of, I was covering issues impacting this community, even though I wasn't necessarily there as yet. So for people who are starting out, don't be dismayed, like, how am I going to get the experience? And then on top of that, fellowships. I cannot stress fellowships enough. I was an ICFJ Bringing Home the World Fellow in 2017. Especially for someone who's trying to break into international reporting, you get the opportunity, you get the grant money, you have an organization behind you, you get safety training, you get all the things that might be a little overwhelming for someone that's trying to break in, but you don't know how. I know for right now, due to COVID, some things have changed with some organizations not commissioning for international travel at the moment, but they're still offering trainings, they're still offering support. And when those things resume, I think you should really, really take advantage of it, because it puts you in a position to get everything you need. And then you get to go tell the story that you want to tell, a lot of times underreported. And then you get that credibility to go to someone like Marc and say, hey, I've done this reporting here. I was a fellow, I did this, this is what came out of it. I'm pitching you this story now. So just that balance there.
And just to wrap up, I've just seen a comment in the chat saying, don't give up, everyone, we need you. And I think that's a sort of good reminder of like the importance of freelance journalists, and perhaps we can sort of conclude on that note. Like the news industry is shifting, it's changing. Why are freelancers still so important? And what do you think they can bring to coverage in going forward?
I think that the beauty of freelancing was that it gives you opportunities to go and do things you would never normally get to do if you're a staff member. I mean, the whole point of being a freelancer is you get unique opportunities to change. Every new job is a new experience and also a new learning. It's something that you're going to learn from. And so, if you're stuck in a basement doing online something for on a staff job, it's secure, but it's very difficult to grow from that position. And I moved far quicker and far faster as a freelancer, I guess, than I'm guessing, than if I'd been a staff member for 15 years. And there are enormous opportunities as a freelancer to learn and to do it. And it's provided you can make a living out of it. It's a fantastic gig. You'll go and do things you'll automatically, one day you're doing X and the next day you get a new commission and you're from a different country, different thing, doing something else. And that's the uniqueness. That's what's wonderful about being a freelancer. And don't give up, because freelancing is hard, I know, at the moment, but it's not going to, we will all need freelancers going forward, inevitably.
Yeah, I believe that freelancers with their unique skill sets and just like where they come from, right? You have people who are working all over the world that are bringing news that maybe a newsroom otherwise may not ever know about, and a unique skill set, unique point of view. So I think that freelancers are crucial to any newsroom, to any society. And of course, like being able to, today I'm in New York, tomorrow I'm in Antigua or Guyana or where have you, there's a excitement level to that, understanding that I'm bringing something that a newsroom on and being a part of that team in that sense, but getting to do it from multiple places. So I think even now more than ever, freelancers are really crucial, especially where the fact that a newsroom or a news team cannot be everywhere. So we get to be those eyes and ears. And I think going forward, that's going to be even more crucial as we face other challenges.
I think that's a really lovely point. A newsroom, can't look in every direction at every direction at the same time. So freelancers provide the opportunity to sort of burrow in the hidden corners, which is so important. And certainly I've seen some absolutely fantastic work coming out of, say, East Africa, which is kind of my patch usually, from the freelance team, because they're looking in a different direction and they're taking time. And yes, often it's not easy, and they're not making a lot of money, and there's a lot of effort, but the work that comes out can be really, really spectacular. So I think on that note, there's a few more practical questions coming in the chat, but I think our partner organizations are handling those with some links and resources that everybody can look at about pitching, accreditation, some of those more practical questions. So perhaps I can just wrap up by reminding everyone about the ICFJ Net Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum on Facebook. There's lots of resources there as well, particularly around covering COVID. And if you follow along there, you'll be able to get some information about some of the webinars that are coming up later this week. The first on lessons lessons learned reporting the pandemic in New York, and the second on covering civil unrest. So if you look out for those, and thank you so much for everybody for coming along, and thanks especially to Marc Perkins from BBC Africa Eye, and to Melissa, who's bringing so much independent journalist experience to this chat, and thank you all for coming along today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for
Take
having
care.
us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.